Hello and welcome to the Fit to Transform podcast, where you learn how to train and diet effectively and, most importantly, how to maintain those results for life, once and for all. I'm Nikias Tomasiello, a transgender training and nutrition coach working online with anyone who's ready for a true lifestyle transformation, anywhere they may be in the world. As a friendly reminder, any and all information provided is for educational purposes only. You should consult with your doctor before implementing any changes to your diet and exercise program. With that disclaimer out of the way, thank you for being here. Now grab yourself a cup of tea or pre-workouts and enjoy. Yo, dear listeners, hello and welcome back to the podcast. Thank you for tuning into this solo episode, which is going to be very practical, and it was inspired by the upcoming summer. Although, if I take a look out of the window right now, this is actually one of the worst days that I've experienced in the last couple of weeks. It's rainy, it's cold, it really doesn't give summer. But the rest of the time, it's actually been relatively warm and sunny, considering I live in Liverpool in the UK. In any case, the summer inspired this episode because between holidays, barbecues, and parties, calorie tracking in the summer months is sometimes about as practical as eating pizza with a spoon. So you're going to need an alternative. And I have developed not one, but two effective alternatives, not only for the summer, but also for all my clients who want to transition away from tracking calories and macros, whether for a single day or for a prolonged period of time. Speaking of which, I also recorded 2 episodes in the past, taking you through a comprehensive guide to making this transition for the long term. These were episodes 76 and 77, titled A Comprehensive Guide to Transitioning Away from Calorie Tracking. The difference between those 2 episodes and this one is that in those episodes I focused on a set of habits that you want to build in order to transition away from tracking. This time, I'm going to focus on 2 specific nutritional strategies that will enable you to hit your nutrition goals without MyFitnessPal. And just so you know, if you don't have the opportunity to take written notes, which I strongly encourage you to do to be able to remember and implement these 2 strategies, I've also just released a blog article with the same exact information that you'll be able to find linked in the show notes below. Now, without further ado, let's talk about my strategies. The first strategy is called the 1 plate rule for a single meal when you decide not to track. And the second is called the fists and thumbs method, which you can apply to an untracked day or multiple untracked days. Let's start with the 1 plate rule. I designed the 1 plate rule based on the Athlete's Plate, which you can look up on Google. It's a nutritional tool validated by research and designed to help active people and athletes fuel adequately depending on their training demands. I changed the Athlete's Plate based on my experience working with clients and so that it would suit physique goals in addition to training goals. The premise is exactly what the name of this rule suggests. You want to put everything you're going to eat in that untracked meal on the same plate without going back for seconds. Don't overthink the size of the plate. Pick a standard sized plate or bowl. You don't want a tiny tea saucer, but you also don't want a whole ass food tray. You also don't just want to put anything you want on this plate. I actually designed 3 different plates depending on your calorie budget. So you can choose from a deficit plate, a maintenance plate, and a surplus plate. And now I'm going to talk you through each one of these options. If you choose the deficit plate, you're going to fill half of the plate with vegetables, a quarter with lean protein, and a quarter with starchy carbs. If you choose the maintenance plate, you're going to divide it into threes. So a third of the plate will be filled up with vegetables, a third with lean protein, and a third with starchy carbs. Finally, if you pick the surplus plate, you want a quarter of the plate full of vegetables, a quarter full of lean protein, and half the plate full of starchy carbs. Now, whatever your calorie budget is, meals out are almost always higher in calories than a meal that you'd make at home because of the ingredients used in the cooking process and because of the overblown portion sizes. So you can use the strategies that I'm going to list right now to enjoy a tasty meal out without a side of 10,000 hidden extra calories. First of all, ask for sauces, dressings, and other condiments on the side. Second, choose a fat-free cooking method, like grilling, boiling, or steaming. Third, if you decide to opt for a fat-containing cooking method and you're at a restaurant, you can request half the typical amount of oil and or butter that the chef usually uses. The fourth and final suggestion is a pro tip to add calorie-friendly flavor. When you get the sauce on the side, dip your fork tines in the sauce before taking a mouthful of food. This way, you're only going to get a few drops of sauce together with each bite, thus keeping the calories minimal while still enjoying a little bit of flavor. Last but not least, you can also make this approach flexible to fit in either an alcoholic drink or a serving of dessert without overloading on calories. And the approach you take is going to be different depending on your calorie budget. If you're choosing a deficit plate or a maintenance plate, then you want to pick a single serving of either alcohol or dessert, not both. And then you take out the starchy carbs from the plate without changing the protein and vegetable ratios. For example, with the deficit plate, let's say you want a serving of dessert. In that case, you're going to fill up your plate with vegetables for half of it, and then one quarter will be lean protein, and you leave the last quarter empty. You're not eating any starchy carbs. Finally, if you pick the surplus plate, you choose a single serving of alcohol or dessert, and then you change the ratios of the surplus plate to the deficit or the maintenance plate, depending on how generous your calorie budget is. For instance, let's say that you have a pretty large calorie budget normally, so your surplus plate normally would look like a quarter vegetables, a quarter lean protein, half starchy carbs. Instead, you're going to have a serving of dessert. So you're going to go to the maintenance plate and you're going to split the plate into threes. So a third veg, a third lean protein, and a third starchy carbs. Let's say that you normally have a relatively small calorie budget for a surplus. In that case, instead of the maintenance plate, you're going to change to the deficit plate and add the serving of dessert on top. As a rule of thumb, I would consider you to have a relatively high calorie budget if your maintenance calories were at around 2200 or above. So your surplus is typically around 2400 and above. In this case, you could keep the maintenance plate and either an alcoholic drink or a serving of dessert. On the other hand, I would switch to the deficit plate in addition to a serving of alcohol or dessert if your maintenance calories were 2100 or below. As a final note on the one plate rule, you don't want to get overtly perfectionistic about this. So if it's a little bit less than a quarter plate full of protein or a little bit more, I don't want you to be losing your head over it. In addition to that, if you're going to make some changes to the ratios, like for example, as I said, with the deficit plate, you're going to take out a quarter of the starchy carbs, you can ask whoever is cooking the meal to remove these starchy carbs. If that's not possible for some reason and they get served to you, you can just leave them on the plate. You don't need to eat them. So this isn't about making the plate look exactly as I've discussed. It's about doing your best to portion control and to make macro and calorie friendly choices. The one plate rule works really well if you're going out to a restaurant, a summer barbecue, or any such event that involves a single meal. Next, I'm going to talk about the fists and thumbs method, which is excellent if, for example, you're going away on a trip or on holiday. So you're going to transition away from tracking for multiple days in a row. Here's how it works. You're going to use your fists and your thumbs to control your portions. One fist will be equivalent to one portion of carbs, protein, calorie containing sugary drinks, vegetables, and fruit. One thumb is going to be equivalent to one portion of fat. Much like with the one plate rule, you don't want to overcomplicate these estimations. For example, what if you have a portion of anything that's more than one fist, but less than two? Keep it simple. If it's more than one fist, count it as a fist and a half. Err on the side of overestimating rather than underestimating, and for the love of all the gods, do not use any other decimals. Do not start counting fists as 1.133333 because that's just mental masturbation. Either it counts as one or it counts as half. That's as complicated as I want you to make this. Moving on, I'm going to give you a step-by-step guide on how to implement this. The first step starts with tracking your food for at least 3 days to a week on both a calorie tracking app and your thumbs and fists log. And this can be an old-fashioned notebook or a note on your phone. You can choose whichever way to track your fists and thumbs that you prefer. If you're only using this method as a temporary alternative to tracking your calories, for example, if you're going away on holiday next week, then practice this at home in preparation for the trip. This first step of tracking both calories and fists and thumbs has two advantages. The first is that you get to grips with this new tracking method, right? The second is that when you add up all of your fists and thumbs for one day, you can work out roughly how many calories these fists and thumbs correspond to because you've been tracking both at the same time. In step 2, you're going to convert your daily calories and macros into daily fists and thumbs. And if you haven't already been taking notes, it's time to pull out pen and paper and do that. First, you're going to count all of your fists and thumbs for one day. Second, you're going to separate the fists specifically into fruit and vegetables, which go together as one category. The second category is starchy carbs, and the third is protein. Fruit and vegetables have fewer calories than starchy carbs and protein. So what you're going to do is you're going to count one fist of fruit and vegetables as half a fist of starchy carbs. And this will become important in a moment when I explain how to make exchanges. For example, if you want more fat or more carbs, how can you exchange your portions accordingly? But first, I'm going to give you a practical example of what the conversion from calories to thumbs and fists can look like. My incredible client M, shout out to M if you're listening, implemented this very method just a couple of weeks ago while they were visiting a friend for a long weekend. Their calorie budget was 1700 calories. So for this example, I'm going to refer to a 1700 calorie day in which M nailed all of their macros. For them, this looks like 10 fists of fruit and vegetables, which can be converted to 5 fists of carbs. Then 4 fists of protein, 5 fists of starchy carbs, and 3 thumbs of fats. So if you add all of these portions together, it comes out at 22 portions in total. So 10 plus 4 plus 5 plus 3, 22 portions. As I was saying, you might be in a situation where you want to or need to make some exchanges. For example, on holiday, you might not have access to as many fruit and vegetables as you would at home. So what can you do if you don't have access to that and therefore you need to fill up those portions with starchy carbohydrates or more protein, for instance? In order to make these exchanges, you need to work out calorically equivalent portions. So all of your portions need to have roughly the same number of calories. Otherwise, it's going to become really complicated to do all the mental math required for the exchanges. Fortunately, I have done all of the work for you. So I'm now about to give you the conversion chart that's going to result in calorically equivalent portions. 1 fist of carbs or protein is equivalent to 1 thumb of fat in terms of the caloric total, whereas 1 fist of vegetables or fruit is equivalent to half a fist of carbs or protein or half a thumb of fat. Simple. For instance, you can replace a fist of potato with a thumb of butter or with 2 fists of vegetables. Now, with this conversion chart, not only can you make exchanges, but you can also convert any calorie target into a number of fists and thumbs. The first step is to convert all of your fists of fruit and vegetables into fists of starchy carbs. So using M's example that I made a couple minutes ago, they have 10 fists of fruit and vegetables in their day. Each fist counts as half a fist of starchy carbs. 10 divided by half is 5. So those 10 fists of fruit and vegetables need to be counted as calorically equivalent to 5 fists of carbs. As a result, these are their revised calorically equivalent portions. They're still going to have 4 portions of protein. They're still going to have 5 portions of starchy carbs, plus 5 extra portions of starchy carbs, which are the fists of fruit and vegetables. So that's 10 starchy carbs. Then they're going to have the same 3 portions, 3 thumbs of fats. So if you add all of these up, 4 plus 10 plus 3, you get a total of 17 calorically equivalent portions. So since these 17 portions in M's case make up 1700 calories, the math is actually pretty easy because all you need to do is divide 1700 by 17, which is 100. So for M, each portion of starchy carbs, protein, and fat is roughly equivalent to 100 calories. So a thumb of fat for them is roughly 100 calories. A fist of carbs or protein is roughly 100 calories, whereas vegetables and fruit count as half of that. So 1 fist of vegetables or 1 fist of fruit is going to be equivalent to 50 calories. Importantly, the math works out this way in M's case because of the size of their hand, which is very specific to them. So you are going to have to do all of these calculations yourself after following step number one, which is counting both your calories and macros and your fists and thumbs for 3 to 7 days. Now, let's stick with M though. Let's say that M wanted to increase their calories to 1800 instead of 1700. They only need to add 100 calories. Again, easy math, because one fist of starchy carbs or protein and one thumb of fat for them is 100 calories. So all they need to do is add one portion of one of these. Or, if they wanted a little bit more volume, they could add two fists of fruits and vegetables. Of course, not all foods only contain one macro. In fact, there are many foods that contain a combination of two or even all three carbs, protein, and fat. So I want to cover how to account for this. For foods that contain protein and carbs, pick the main macronutrient of the two. For example, if I'm eating beans or lentils, I'm going to count them as a carb. This is because protein and carbs both contain 4 calories per gram. Therefore, a fist of protein is going to be equivalent to a fist of carbs when it comes to their calorie content. On the other hand, for foods containing dietary fat and another macronutrient, I'd count each fist as a portion of the other macronutrient and as half a portion of dietary fat. For example, you'd count one fist of salmon or tofu as one fist of protein plus half a thumb of fat. This is because dietary fat contains 9 calories per gram, so more than twice as many calories as carbs and protein, which contain 4 calories per gram, and you need to account for this. Here's a list of common foods containing both fat and another macronutrient. Eggs, salmon, lamb, fatty cuts of beef or pork, processed meats like prosciutto, chorizo, sausage, and bacon, tofu, and tempeh. It's by no means an exhaustive list, but it should give you a pretty good idea of the kinds of foods that typically contain dietary fat and another macronutrient. When it comes to highly palatable foods like cake, cookies, chips, french fries, and the like, we need to account for the fact that these are typically a mix of highly processed carbs and dietary fats, which is what makes them so high in calories, but also low in nutrients like fiber and protein. You can measure these foods as either thumbs or fists, depending on what's easier, but you want to count them as double that portion. For example, if you're having a fist of cake, you're going to count it as 2 fists of carbs. If you're having a thumb of cake, you're going to be counting it as 2 thumbs of fats. This is a straightforward and effective way to account for the extra calories coming from both the carbs and the fats in these foods. Finally, what do we do about alcohol? You can use either portioning method for alcohol, depending on the serving size. Thumbs, for example, work well for shots, whereas fists are more suited to bigger serving sizes like glasses or pints. If you're using thumbs, count the alcohol as a fat. If you're using fists, count it as a carbohydrate. However, alcohol is neither a carb nor a fat, technically speaking, and it contains 7 calories per gram. So we need to account for the fact that it contains more calories than protein and carbs, the fact that some alcoholic drinks also have additional calorie containing ingredients, and the fact that portioning out liquids using fists and thumbs is more challenging than portioning out solid food. To account for all of this, you're going to count each fist and thumb of alcohol as twice the portion. So if you have one fist of wine, you're going to count it as 2 fists of carbs. And if you have one thumb of vodka, you're going to count it as 2 thumbs of fat. So you're going to account for alcohol much like you would for highly palatable foods. And that's a wrap for today's very practical strategies to stay on top of your nutrition goals and maintain health promoting nutritional habits, even if you can't or do not want to count your calories. With my one plate rule or the fists and thumbs method, you can stop tracking and continue to make strides towards your goals. Because if you've been around this block long enough, you will know by now that I think tracking calories is a very valuable tool, but we don't want that to become our crutch without which we can't continue achieving our fitness goals. On that note, thank you very much for listening. As always, I would love it if you wanted to leave a 5-star rating or review if you have the time. I would love it even more if you decided that it was your time to shine and put in your application to work on a one-on-one basis with me as your online training and nutrition coach. And last but not least, I am so thankful that you chose once again to spend some time with me today. Thanks for listening, and I will talk to you in the next episode. Lastly, if you want to support the podcast and help me reach more people, please leave a 5-star rating or review on any podcast platform that you're using. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll speak to you soon.